Welcome back to the panel discussion, Understanding the Intersection of Customer Service and Security in the Cloud, sponsored by Covisint on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Sean Kingsbury, the Chief Information Officer of the Recovery Accountability and Transparency Board, Dan Doney, the Chief Innovation Officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Commander Tony Thornton, Deputy Director of the Health Information Technology Directorate for the Defense Health Agency, and David Miller, the Chief Security Officer at Covisint. Now, gentlemen, before break, we were talking a lot about security. Sean, you ended on a very interesting note regarding the idea of data in transit. When you secure your data, whether it's in transit, whether it's encrypted, at rest, or both. Let me toss it over to Dan for a second. One of the big issues I think that's coming up and that the government is trying to go down this path is the idea of roles and responsibilities, securing data at the roles level. Do you have access, and when you have access, and do you have the responsibility to download the data or move the data or to alter the data or just to look at the data? I think DoD is way ahead of the civilian population around this issue. Talk a little bit about how the DIA and maybe more broadly the intelligence community is addressing this.
Yeah, well, what I'd say first is the question of encrypting at rest, encrypting in transit is from a technical perspective, that's not the hard part. The question is, who can see it? Who can unlock the encryption? And this comes down to, especially when you're working in an environment like Tony, where you have you're a citizen-facing organization, and you've got citizens from across the country who need to access their own government-held privacy data. In our case, in working with coalition partners, where for disaster relief, we may be working with these 20, 30 folks in one setting and 5 folks in another setting. You have a really important and fundamental challenge. Here's what's afoot. There is a fundamental rethinking that needs to be done in the way that we deliver IT. In the past, you had 2 essential roles. You had the end user, and then you had the technician, the super user or the admin. And so you manage those 2 things very separately, and oftentimes you'd have, for example, separate identities for one role versus another, and you track and maintain them. The cloud changes all that out of necessity. It changed really before the cloud, but it's distinctly different now. Look, our failure to recognize that these 2 things are the same has resulted in some high-profile leaks, right? When you give the admin access to all sorts of things, because he's the admin and he runs the infrastructure, bad things can happen in that setting. So if I've got software configured everything, software configured infrastructure, for example, the question of who has the rights to spin up this server, who has the rights to see this particular data, and especially in the world of data science. The data scientist now is a hybrid between the end user and the technician. So enabling these kinds of things requires us to collapse those 2 distinctions. Now, doing that means that we must take on a much more robust, much more significant and fine-grained way that we have of protecting our data. Roles alone are not enough to protect this data because roles define. Let me give you an example of this. If I'm a counterintelligence officer, so it's my responsibility to check and see who might be an insider, and it happens that I'm engaging in behavior that's of interest to counterintelligence. So there's a counterintelligence case against me. Just because I have the role of counterintelligence officer doesn't mean I should see that particular data. The mechanisms that we use to protect our data must become much more sophisticated. I was sort of schooled on this as I went to meet with some folks in the Philadelphia HIDTA. That's the high-intensity drug trafficking area. We went up to talk about intelligence community models for how we protect data. And the guy said to me, this is really profound. This was a number of years back, and it forced me to rethink the whole model. He said, look, Dan, on any given day, you, the intelligence community, may have a handful of insiders, and we hope that's not true, but realistically, that may well be true. He said, all of my guys are insiders. Look, Joe, the policeman, is playing poker with his buddy, and Joe's on the right side of the law, his buddy's on the other side of the law, and he wants to know where he stands. Or Joe's daughter is dating a guy, and he wants to know if this guy has a criminal record. That's misuse of the data, and it happens all the time at a very granular level. This is security. Our old model of protecting things by network boundaries and protecting things by coarse-grained attributes like security clearances and so on is is a good thing. I'm not saying we need to throw all that out, but we need to think much more in a much deeper way about what we call stakeholder managed authorization. That's really empowering the data owner, empowering the business owner, and building these authorization rules according to the business rules. And that's really a different model of running security. It requires a common framework. So this we must do. We must have a framework that applies across all of our systems such that we can manage these attributes. We need to empower folks to control their data at a much more fine-grained level than the way we've been doing in the past.
David, you were shaking your head.
I can't amplify that specific thing enough, right? You know, if security's become kind of a dirty word, unfortunately, right? And oftentimes, instead of becoming an enabler, what it does is become something that disenables us to do things, right? You know, the way I always like looking at it, right? You know, coming from Detroit and coming from automotive, right? You know, information security is a lot like the brakes on your car. Okay, the function of brakes on your car is to slow your car down. The purpose of brakes on your car is to let you go fast. Security is the same thing. Its function is to keep data secure, but its purpose is to allow you to share information. That's really what it is. And having that ability to say, how is it that I manage who has access? And when, right? We also have a tendency to look, right? You know, the old Star Trek Wrath of Khan, right? You know, the way he got him is he was a two-dimensional thinker, not a three-dimensional thinker. We have to think about security in three-dimensional ways. Today, right? You know, we used to always think, and it was always about networks, right? Can I get to the network or can I not get to the network? That is goodness enough. Now it's like, well, no, it's about users, right? So it's does Dave Miller have access to this or not, right? Really, where we need to go three-dimensionally is then to also say purpose of access, right, and real-time risk that says, well, okay, does Dave Miller have access to this information at 2 o'clock in the morning from his house? That's different than does Dave Miller have access to this information when he's sitting at his desk at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? So that ability to say it's just not on and off, it's on and off depending on risk parameters and those sorts of things. That's where the future of this access management is really going. That allows us to not worry about the insider guy, right? So the guy who wants to look up the criminal record of the boyfriend, right? He can't do it at home, right? Okay, if you're going to do it, you got to do it from your desk at work, which may stop him from doing those sorts of things.
Let me shift to Commander Thornton, because one of the things that you're going to have this challenge, because doctors and nurses need access to data, but maybe they need read-only access versus edit access, right? How are you guys starting to address that?
So we, again, and certainly appreciate the example David gave. That's great about the break. So we use that one for a long time. We call it access control, and it's corny to say, but it's truly getting the right information to the right people at the right time. You don't want your last colonoscopy results on Facebook. So it's critical to make sure that we are managing that and that we have the access controls. At the core of it is identity management. Again, the technology exists there to help us manage that, but it does come at a cost. You know, if you ask the security bubbas, you know, they would lock everything down, but that precludes us from delivering quality health care. So for us, it's going to be policies and managing the workflow and the technologies in order to do that. But it's critical in terms of managing, making sure the right health information is to the right people. You know, people just assume because you're a doctor, you need to have access to everything, and that's not necessarily the case. It needs to be compartmentalized and managed in a way to make sure, again, like I said in the beginning, that the right information gets to the right people, and even as we transition it over to commercial partners and whatnot, and to our customers, patients.
And you mentioned the policies to manage the workflow. Something that you were talking about previously was something called the productivity paradox. I think that's a good segue, because I think one of the things is, as Dave was saying, security can't be the lead wall that you walk into every time. It's got to be the ability to manage the productivity of your organization. So talk a little bit about that paradox and how you guys are maybe trying to overcome it.
Well, I think all of us are challenged. You know, IT professionals, people think that you just turn the IT on and all of a sudden it's supposed to work, and that it either optimizes or improves or reduces or does things, and that's absolutely right. But first and foremost, you have to have your business model locked in. You have to know what the requirement is for what it is you're going to provision the IT for. And so particularly within DoD healthcare, we're challenged with it because like you said in the beginning, we have tons of legacy systems and whatnot, and it's not as easy as just reducing your footprint from 100 data centers down to 5 or to 20 or whatever it is. There's an offset. And so for us, it's for us understanding what our business is, in this case healthcare, and how to leverage those workflows and business rules to advance or use technology as an enabler to deliver better healthcare. So we recognize it, and again, we're going through doing the analytics, if you would, to kind of identify where those shortcomings are and where they're not in order to optimize healthcare delivery.
Let me turn to Sean for a second, because I think this also applies to what you're doing, because you also not only have a diverse customer base, but also the roles and responsibilities piece, but that all of it comes back to business processes. Do you see the same paradox that Commander Thornton's talking about?
In a big way. There's one big point here is customer expectations are extremely higher now, right? There's this expectation that, because you got to think, everyone's so mobile, and at home they do so many things and have access to so much information. The expectations in the office are even higher when you look at the services that have to be delivered. That's one point, because now that kind of pushes, again, it pushes the business side in the office to deliver services that with the performance and dealing with the security types of issues. Now, we had to learn an interesting point, right? We had to learn an interesting fact, right? When we designed our private cloud infrastructure as a service to deliver, it's interesting when you bring up you brought up the point about enable the customer to be able to define and set up their own security boundaries, right? The challenge that we have, because we actually tried to go down that path with applications that we're delivering as a service. So you have these layers of security and access controls from, persistent versus non-persistent VDIs. What applications you actually have rights to have within this VDI. What data you actually have rights to within these services. And it becomes interesting when you look at the applications in a lot of cases aren't designed for you to be able to enable the user to actually configure their own level of security controls, right? So now what that really means is you have to play a big role in the continuous monitoring. So what we've done is we actually have in our Cloud Hub stack, where we actually have monitoring all the way down to the attributes within the database that says, is someone accessing this attribute at 1 o'clock in the morning? And if so, alerts get triggered and people do certain things, right? So it's that combination, it's that balance that you have to get. You want to deliver the services, but there are trade-offs, but now you have to figure out what's that line to be able to deliver the acceptable level of service to enable the customers to be happy with the service they're delivering.
Yeah, that points to an important piece, and that is continuous compliance monitoring. Coupled with the speed and the agility of cloud is the need to have continuous oversight of what's going on. For us to, the purpose of the breaks, this is the control that we need to have over what's going on, but we lose, if we use the old models for control, we lose all the benefits of the cloud. So we need to push these new models, which are really based on a trust but verify paradigm. So if I can empower folks to act very quickly and on the edge, and I have a robust management model that allows me to delegate the authority, and at the same time I have continuous compliance monitoring such that I can see when people step over the line. Not only that, they can see when they step over the line. We have a different model for IT delivery.
All right, we're almost out of time, so let me turn to Commander Thornton real quick and get some thoughts. Where is cloud going from your perspective next 2, 3, 5 years?
It is the way of the future in my mind, because of all the things that we've talked about. Certainly allows us to be more agile, but it also allows us to optimize technology. So it is absolutely the way to go, particularly within the healthcare realm, because of how diverse our customers, both internally and external, the base. And so it is the next step in terms of technology advancements.
But for you guys, since you guys are fairly new, is it something that's going to happen soonest from your perspective? Or is it something that, again, Sean talked a lot earlier and we didn't get a chance to touch upon the culture change. People, because you have legacy systems, have to kind of get more comfortable with it.
We're talking within the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to roll out some things and do some stuff. Again, we have our electronic health record initiative on the brink. We're working with DISA to work through the policies and the security mechanisms, but we recognize it's critical to our success as an organization, but more importantly, to deliver better quality health care for our customers.
All right, and the last word of the day goes to David Miller from Covisint. Talk about where you're seeing cloud going, both public and private sector.
So, the way that I like putting it is, unfortunately, right, so the cloud is now dead. In 5 years, there's not going to be a cloud, right? Because if you think about cloud are discrete things, right? I always think of the beginning of The Simpsons, right? There are these discrete things, and it was great. The idea was the cloud is out there, right? The way I think that I like looking at it, and if the IBM guys can coin this term, right, it's really going to be the mist, right? It's going to be data everywhere and users everywhere. And this idea of being able to get the right data to the right users at the right time is going to become unbelievably more complicated from a standpoint of the fact that it's everywhere. But it's also going to become more complicated because, it was brought up before, our users now are experts. So when you roll out a website that does something, they can't understand why it doesn't work perfectly, because I can order something on Amazon by clicking. So I have expert users, data everywhere, but all the same security issues. That's going to be the challenge in the next 5 years.
Very nice. Something to look forward to. I like that. You come up with several good things we're all going to steal from you: breaks, popcorn, and mist. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time. You've been listening to the panel discussion, Understanding the Intersection of Customer Service and Security in the Cloud, sponsored by Covisint on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. I'm your moderator, Jason Miller. I'd like to thank our guests today, Sean Kingsbury, the Chief Information Officer of the Recovery Accountability and Transparency Board, Dan Doney, the Chief Innovation Officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Commander Tony Thornton, Deputy Director of Health Information Technology Directorate at the Defense Health Agency, and David Miller, Chief Security Officer at Covisint. Gentlemen, thank you.